we played the clips from the videos, that sometimes the volumes varied. So you might have to play around with your own volumes. I didn't keep track of how many are on tonight, but somewhere between 40 and 50. The process for asking questions would be to write them up in chat. And Jim's wife, Susan, is right behind him, or right near him, and she is going to be monitoring the question stream that comes up. So feel free to ask questions. And I will say, there is a lot that we can't answer. Maybe George would be able to, but we will do our best. Zoom is also, in big groups, is not conducive to a lot of conversation. So we scheduled a follow-up discussion for anybody that wants to follow up on Saturday, January 23rd at 9 a.m. in the morning. And if there are people interested, we will have some discussion. There's lots to think about based on just the video clips that you'll see from Leroy Setziol, and a couple from Monica as well. And if there's no interest to follow up, then we won't do anything. But if there is, then we'll discuss how we might proceed. I want to put a plug in for upcoming programs. We're doing this kind of program every month on the second Tuesday at 7 o'clock. And then we have some specials in between. So we have a special on Thursday, January 21st, which is actually produced by the club I joined in California called the Central Coast Carvers. I've joined them about two and a half months ago, and I join in with them every Tuesday morning at 10. It's quite a fascinating group of 15 to 20 people. And there are a couple of them that showed what they were working on, and they were gigantic gourds that were very thick and grown in California. And I suggested that they put a program together, which they are. So they're going to do 3 people conversation about growing gourds, harvesting gourds, cutting gourds, carving them, wood burning them, finishing them. And these are really astounding things. And if you Google gourd carving and look at images, you can't help but be impressed. So that's something we're not doing, but it's available. On February 4th, one of our board members and carvers in both groups is Terry Burnside. And Terry has been carving for 20 years. Said he's carved 200 wood spirits of various kinds. And so he's going to do a 1-hour demo on February 4th, which is a teaser to see if anybody who actually wants to carve more serious wood spirits. So we schedule a class 10 days, 2 weeks later on February 18th and 25th, kind of a simple 2-session class. So that's something new. And if there's enough interest in this topic, then Terry will continue on and we'll do a variety of things. The February and March programs are quite interesting. Don Baer is going to talk about what I call the wild world of bird carving. Don has been the fixture in the Portland area, has been teaching carving to really a large group of people for over 30 years. He is one of the co-founders of the Columbia Flyway show, and also is active in the Feather and Quill Carving Club. And the world of bird carving is astounding. Just like the world of mammal carving is astounding, and the world of fish carving is astounding, and the world of human carving is astounding. So our goal over a couple of years is to explore the various different types. And so Don is the speaker for that. And it will be nominally a 90-minute program talking about both the local, regional, and national aspects of bird carving for those people that really don't know anything about it and haven't even thought about it. It's another one of these opportunities to fall in love. March 9th, the March program is Janet Bolyard, who is lives in Mesa, Arizona, known by Jerry Boone, who's on the call tonight, is also on the board and is, as far as I'm concerned, member number 1 of the Oregon Carvers Guild, because he was the first one that held up his hand when he said, we're going to keep this thing going. So Janet wrote a very interesting book on soap carving. And normally we think soap carving is kids oriented, and it is kids oriented, but she's got some really exotic carving things going on, and I was very impressed with the book. And so she's going to walk through all those topics, and it's fascinating. And it's one of another themes over the next couple of years on exploring different materials other than wood, because some people carve stone, some people carve leather, some people carve linoleum, some carve whatever. The last one is this Max Sutter relief carving class. It's a 5-week program on Mondays at 1 o'clock. It runs for 90 minutes. This is the second version. We just completed the first group, and it went quite well. This partly is an experiment to see how well teaching goes over Zoom, and homework in between. So I'm quite impressed with the group that was there. We had 2 people. Of the 9, we had 2 in California. One of our members was camping out in Maine for a couple months, so she joined. One was in Salem, and the rest were in the Portland area. I want to give extraordinary credit to these organizations. The University of Oregon Museum of Art did a retrospective on Leroy Setziol 1991 and did a catalog, which is really extraordinary. And high-quality photographs, lots of really good essays that went into it. It's available through interlibrary loan, and I would encourage you, if you have any interest, to do that, to go check it out. I also want to thank directly and indirectly Monica, because she is the carrier of the flame, if you will, because she grew up with him, with Leroy. And as an artist in her own right, she combines weaving and wood carving and does really very interesting stuff. Some of work that she does is carving by itself. But a lot of it is mixed media, and it's small stuff and big stuff. And we hope that someday she'll be able to teach a workshop for us. She's obviously locked down just like we are. She's been teaching at the Sitka summer programs, and she hopes that she'll be able to teach in August or September of this year. She's keeping her fingers crossed. Nobody knows. But I encourage you to keep your eyes out for that. We will also put in the newsletter what we know and what we can find out. The Portland Art Museum, I forget, Jim, maybe 2016, did a 23-piece retrospective on Leroy Setziol's work. And there's a handout that's referenced on the right side of the slide, which is Oregon Live has posted all of those photos on a website, so you can look at them. We have a handout that it's now posted up live on the OregonCarvers.com website under galleries. If you look at Setziol, you'll see a link to that handout. It's also a link to all of the public places where you can see the works that we know of within reason in and around the area. One in Bend and some in Salem, etc. What is silent here is the Salem Art Association produced a fabulous DVD, a documentary video, and it is the basis for all of the video clips we're going to watch tonight. They gave us permission to not only use it, but also to host that video on our website. And so it's been posted now under the website gallery, so all the videos you're seeing tonight, you'll be able to watch and look at on our website in somewhat different order. I want to thank Jim Spitzer for taking leadership on this project. I asked him last summer if he would kind of take it over, and he said, "Oh yeah, sure, no problem." And he did. He jumped in. He was been traveling. He took photos when he was down the coast. He stopped in at Free Gallery in south of Lincoln City, and talking to him was where we discovered part of Monica's work. But I also want to thank Ruth Worthington. From my perspective, that about a year and a half ago, she was the first one that pointed out that the doors at the Nordic House near Washington Square in Portland were carved by Monica, but designed by Leroy. And that was a jog in my own mind. I also want to thank Jerry Sellers, because Jerry would show up about a year and a half ago and start carving in the open carving labs that we had at the Guild shop, and was carving and inspired by Leroy's work. The theme here is notable Oregon carvers. A number of people have asked, have you ever heard of Leroy Setziol? They said no. And so this is partly art education 101, is to try to build knowledge and appreciation, really, of people that are notable in our history. And I've listed some of them here. And one of the themes I want to point out is very few of them are from Oregon. They all had, most of them had their roots elsewhere. Leroy will talk about, but he grew up in Buffalo and spent time in the Army and adult life in Baltimore, and then had a number of places in Portland as he was a struggling artist. Max Sutter, we've written about in the newsletter, came into the town. Nora Hall spent 10 years here and has some important, all of the 9 videos that she produced were produced in Oregon. But she was a product of the Netherlands, and we happened to benefit from her later on in life. We'll go through some other ones of those later, but I want to deal with that. We're going to see the Leroy Setziol in the lower right-hand picture as an elder statesman carver being interviewed for the documentary. There's earlier photos of him as a younger man. As he moved through here, he was already 35 years old when he moved to Portland. So he had a couple of kids by 1950, and an interesting life. And he moved here because while he was in the Army stationed in Germany, his wife got a job teaching in Portland. So he said, yeah, sounds like a good idea. And later on, he said that was one of the 2 best moves he made. The second one being when he moved out of Portland to Sheridan and got his retreat workshop going. The picture on the upper left is a workshop as of 2 weeks ago. It's the one that he did. You'll see the steps on the far right. That is his workshop at the end of that building, and what's inside, the rest, I don't know, probably lots of wood. We did take some pictures. It's a stunning setting, rural, outside, about 8 minutes from downtown Sheridan, which is a logging town. It's really idyllic. It's this classic coastal range. Monica lives almost there. She's having to deal with some water quality issues, so she's living in town right now. But Jim and I were able to go there and be masked and be distanced and meet with her in the living room of the house that Leroy built and where she lives. They also have a gallery on the premises. A big turning point of this documentary is around Salishan Lodge, and those of us that have been there really love it, appreciate it. Salishan, for those of you in California, it's about 2 hours drive from Portland. It's on the coast south of Lincoln City. It's quite a large complex. It was built in circa 1965. And the black circle is the lodge itself. A lot of the other dwellings are rentable resort rooms, hotel stays. And across the Highway 101 used to be a thriving shopping complex. And then there's golf course, 2 different golf courses either side of the highway, and then there's a spit and a peninsula, which has got stunning things. It's gone through a lot of transition in the time that I've been here. This is the view of the lodge from the south. It's just classic Northwest setting, and it's really just a delightful place to be. I'm going to now play a video clip. The format of these video clips is all the same. You can see on the left-hand side, if you can read it, it's kind of a title and the length of it, so it's 2 minutes long. Most of these are somewhere between 1 and 4 minutes, 1 and 3. But he's now telling the story of how Salishan worked in 1965 Again, this is 15 years into being a struggling artist, living in downtown Portland, and finally getting this contract.
For Salishan was the beginning of my being able to be on my own, really, because and that was almost accidental. What is that? It's almost 40 years ago. Salishan.
Yes.
But it's an interesting story because John Storrs, who was the architect at Salishan, came by and asked me and several other artists to make sand castings for the dining room. Sand castings at that time were very big. Not very good, but very big. And then a couple of weeks later, he came by and picked up my sand casting, and he left. And a minute later, he stuck his head back in the door, saying, "By the way, you have any wood carvings around?" And I said, "No, but there is one down at the Contemporary Crafts Gallery." So he was on his way to a meeting of the big boys, and so he went down and he picked up one of the little grid and took it to the meeting, and that was the end of the sand casting and the beginning of the commission for Salishan. And that was a great advance for me. The other good thing about the Salishan commission was they made no demands at all, except the number. A whole bunch, 14 panels this size, the same size as this table, 3 by 7, and so I was free to do anything I wanted, and that was heaven on earth. The only thing that was a little difficult was the timing. I had to do one a week, and it was kind of an overtime situation. But I did it and delivered them before the lodge was done.
Okay, so you can get a sense of that story. We stayed there over the years. My wife and I were married in 1965. We celebrated our 25th anniversary in 1990 there, and so we have some milestones that are interesting. There's a lot of photos that Jim and I have taken and collected. Some of them we scanned out of the books. I'm going to point you to the second one from the left, and you notice the key lock, or the lock, the brass key thing toward the bottom of that, and above it is a handle. And it's just, I assume that is a hidden door. Jim, I don't know for sure where that's at, but it's just exquisite as a close-up to see I would call it the sensuousness of that combined with the function of that piece. He mentioned the Contemporary Craft Gallery. I was aware of it as an institution and visited it once when it was down on Corbett, which is where he lived, which is near John's Landing area, just a little bit north of that. And then they moved to the North Park blocks, and then the Guild of Oregon Woodworkers, we did a program there on John Economaki and his work, and they became a showcase for artist work over the years. They started out really small, and then they had hard times, and they got, last I heard, they were absorbed by the Pacific Northwest College of Art, by PNCA. And I don't know if they still exist, but it became one of the lifelines for Leroy to sell his work. And Jim, you took this picture. The red things on the bottom are the tops of 2 upholstered seats. And you can just kind of look at individual pieces. I look in the middle panel, this pyramidal shaped thing, from a distance, it looks good. I think close up, it looks good. But to be able to carve that and get those straight lines is pretty amazing. And then in the lower right, just to look at some of these volcano-like details, whatever his intentions were, I don't know. But it's quite interesting to me. All of this fits in the world of architectural carving. So we have an instructor here named Chuck Reinhardt who calls himself a classical carver. Classical carving tends to be European, Roman, Greek, but they were adornments of various buildings, and I would call those architectural carvings. But here, these are the role is working with architects and creating pieces of buildings under design. So here's a short clip.
Discovered by the architects.
Yeah. Well, I enjoyed working with architects because actually there's a great similarity between other artists and architects. An architect is not simply a builder of buildings, because the building has to be significant. The building had to have a certain spirituality about it that is not definable, but nevertheless is there.
I can remember that we were very much attracted by the hidden architectural quality in your sculpture. Part of it came from what used to be called the grid.
Yeah, well, I think there are certain aspects about the grid that I think of architecturally, so that there are like spatial and formal relationships that I think of architecturally, in that you have a major statement, but then I always have an area of little tiny stuff, which is easy to confuse with a little city. Yeah, right. And that's the way I think of it too. So
what he didn't say here is that his daughter Monica, when she must have been a high schooler. Jim, you might recall at her age, but she remembers writing cold letters to 20 different architects in Portland to try to drum up business. And they got a hit on one of those. And, you think about the law of large numbers and kind of starting from scratch and being broke and trying to make your way in life. So, Monica contributed to that effort. Jim, I'll put you on the spot just for a minute to talk about his ministerial background. Do you remember enough about that to say about that?
Just a little bit. He was in World War II. He became a chaplain in the late 30s. And then in World War II, he served in the Army in the South Pacific as they were advancing toward Japan. He continued after the war, as I recall, in a ministry, and realized, and then he went back into the Army, was posted in Germany, and at some point he said it was not for him. The ministry was not for him, and I don't know why that is, but it was about that point that he's moving out here to Portland. 50.
Yeah. So I did read that just recently. Refresh my memory. He was a Protestant minister in Baltimore, very involved with social issues that were pushing the edge, and he ran afoul of conservative members. Sounds familiar, does it? To some of us.
Yes.
But he finally realized that was not cut out for him, and so he ended up going into art. You're looking at the doorway to the University of Portland Chapel. The write-up said there's 4 tons of black walnut in that. So just think about going to your favorite wood store and trying to buy 4 tons of black walnut, and think about that. This is a stunning piece. It's public. It's one of about 15 pieces that Jim documented in the handout that's pointed to on the website. But when you start zooming in and your eyes start looking at some of the detail, and I'll do that in a few slides. But architecturally, there's also these posts that are holding up a big canopy roof over the entrance, rain shield, if you will. And these are made out of oak, I think white oak, and they're carved. You can see the checking and cracking on some of them. I wondered about how that works structurally. I don't think they're steel on the inside, but I don't know that for sure. I think there are 4 to 8 of these pillars around. And from an architectural viewpoint, it's quite interesting. My wife and I were at a Russian restaurant with a friend, American, that was working in Russia. She comes back once a year on the southeast side, and there was a column, a post inside this restaurant on the inner southeast side that had a big rooster foot carved into the pillar itself. And the notion of adorning, structural elements, I think is quite an interesting thing. So now zooming in on some of the details, Jerry Sellers made a comment once about, you think about the symbolism on each one of these things. This is a religious institution, so there'd be a lot of religious symbolism here. But it was struck by relatively simple stuff, but also how beautiful the gouge marks are that are left behind. The one on the left is the handle, and it is showing, you can see the handle and then the swirl around it radiating out from the center. I don't know. I didn't have any opportunity to read the symbolism of this. I suspect it's quite interesting, but I don't know what it is. So now we're going to go into a section called design. There's about 3 videos here that talk about his design philosophy. And then later on, there's some practical things where he deals with chisels and gouges and antique and wood and finishing, those kind of things.
You don't arrive at designs by sitting in the corner and waiting for an inspiration. No, you start with the material. See if the material has anything to say to you, or it does happen in the middle of the night or any time. Sometimes it does happen that a full-blown image pops into your head and you go ahead and do it. But a great deal of the time it's the other way around. You start with very little or nothing, and you take it from there. And one stroke leads to another. And one stroke leads to another, and pretty soon you're changing your ideas, and the thing works out because it is a cooperative enterprise with the material. It works out the better. Now, 2 other things. One, in the middle, 2 things happen in the middle of working. One, and that's how you progress and mature. While you're working on one design, something else pops into your head. And then from there, and it grows like a crescendo. One thing leads to another, and pretty soon you're doing things you never thought you were capable of in the first place. And so I think that's very important. But it's, I guess it's, to a certain extent, it means that you sit loose to yourself. Aristotle, who said many things, Aristotle said the essence of art is in repetition. And to a certain extent, it's exactly right in all the arts. You take music, some composers use it to a large extent, too much. But you have to, if you want to establish a point, you have to have repetition. And that's the trouble with so-called modern movements, well, on scale, you're not allowed to repeat. The result is you musically you say something, and then it gets lost in the jumble. But like Mozart, Beethoven, and the rest of them, they always sometimes say it 4, 5, 10 times, because it's important that if something is important, it has to be repeated. That's my speech for today.
It's obviously working on a large panel. The grid work that he did, there was a video clip that I didn't capture out of the DVD, but he talks about how he invented or came up with the grid idea. And he had a project, a commission, where he was given the wood. And Jim, you might remember, I think the wood was myrtle. And he hated it. He said it was the worst choice possible you could ever imagine. And he started carving, and then it chipped and broke, and he whittled it down and got something smaller, and then he got something smaller, and eventually he had this aha moment of the grid. And for decades after that, he then structured a lot, but not all of his carvings with some form of a grid pattern. And he would cut these lines. You can see the lines in this picture that's up on the screen with a circular saw of some form. When we were visiting Monica in the shop, she had a small bladed circular saw that she would cut some of this stuff with. But it gave him, the large panels were decomposed, and then he could try to fit in and figure out what he wanted to do with the design. The thing I found interesting comparing his approach with Monica's is that you'll hear a number of comments about him being freeform. He'll just approach it to see what the wood wants it to be, and he comes in with no preconceived notions, and he'll just kind of go with the flow. And a lot of what, particularly a big commission that Monica did for the city of McMinnville City Hall area, was specified, if you will, to try to get some symbols, and we'll look at a video of that. So it really is a big left brain, right brain kind of thing. And there's clearly a big artistic right brain spirituality thing with Leroy here. And he's going to deal with this in this topic called existential design. And Jim and I have been engaging with that. And this is a piece of what some of us would like to talk to on the 23rd, if you're willing to try to explore that, because it's a piece of art education that is foreign to me, but interesting to me.
The wood is existential. It is the way the tree wanted to grow in that particular environment. So it's an existential situation, and it knows how to grow as a tree better than you do. Like most artists, I think you arrive at a kind of a revelation or an inspiration in the shape of a design. And I make up designs existentially. What I mean by existential designing, you arrive at your shop in a certain condition. Sometimes raring to go, sometimes no go. And so that is, to begin with, is part of the existential situation. The other thing is what has happened to you yesterday or this morning or whatever. And that's also part of the existential situation. And the other thing is about if you've had love or a fight with your wife. That's part of it. So the whole milieu is important to find expression without going through your brain. And this is so I do sometimes with my eyes closed, but not always. Make scribbles. Now, see that so far is, so far it's meaningless. No, I would take that back. It's not meaningless. It's existential. So then I look at it and see if there's anything there. And sometimes there's nothing there. But often I find something. There it is. That's the way I am today. I was going to do something quite different here. See, these lines are for making small saw cuts with small carvings. But maybe I'll leave that there.
Try to teach that to students. Are there any questions, Jim or Susan?
No. None yet.
Encouragement.
Okay. So think about it. Think about it. Think of possible questions for George Blackman to answer. This next clip is actually the opening for the CD, and it's probably the last of what I would call the philosophical sides of the things that we'll see tonight.
I think the word destiny. Destiny is the combination of the historical circumstances and your own talents and your ability to pursue your talents. My main talents are working with my hands and a more wide open kind of existence. In the originating of a panel, I try not to have specific rational thoughts, but rather existential thoughts, so that I approach a piece of wood, whether it's freestanding or bas relief, without anything specific in mind at all, and let come what comes. And that in that sense, my work is also my play. I have the beginning of a poem in my little head, and that is, there is a green hill just over the horizon that is not there. Now that's what I think about the arts. The idea of the spirit. The spirit is not recognizable, but it's there. It's not anything, but it's the most important thing. Because there are so many pieces to carve, you make discoveries all the time. While you're working, the grain does one thing and your tool does another thing, and suddenly you look at it and say, wow, that's a discovery that leads to another discovery, to another discovery.
One of the things that's interesting to me in these pictures is the texture of the wood. See if I can go back. This
wood is existential. The wood is existential.
I assume this is teak, but I don't know what it is. But
I think the word destiny. Destiny is the combination of the historical circumstances.
But you look at that wood and you say, "Oh my goodness." He's dealing with knots, maybe whatever that piece is in the kind of the upper center left. The sheen that he's getting out of these gouge cuts. obviously help with the reflection from the photography. But he did a lot of work. We'll hear about teak later on, and George, you might talk about that later on too. But there's a number of panels that are done in Alaska yellow cedar, and a lot of what Monica does is with Alaska yellow cedar. He also has a story elsewhere in the documentary about Honduran mahogany. When he was a poor, struggling artist for so many years, he would hang around the dumpsters when people were remodeling and doing demolition of old buildings, and he would salvage Honduran mahogany out of that, and that became an important source of wood for him. He'll also have a comment later on about softwood versus hardwoods, the contrast between both of them. George, do you have any comments about teak based on what you...
Well, I would like to first say, notice the texture of this preliminary carving, which I believe this is black walnut.
Okay, thank you.
One thing we found was you didn't have these big knots in teak. I've never had a piece of teak with a knot in it. I don't know how it grows that way, but that's what we see when we get it here.
Okay.
Now, notice the difference in the texture of this picture and the finished work of the ones on the wall. There's many hours of refinement between the initial forms and discoveries as you go through this developing process. And I want to reinforce what he said, that he inspired me. This is a matter of being aware of discoveries as you go along. You don't have all the design work done and then do it. It's a developing thing.
George, can you talk a little bit about yourself?
Well, I have a bachelor's degree in sculpture from Portland State, and I've never made my living as a carver, but it's always been in my life. And I totally agree. The wood he really, really hated that got him started on grid. Now I spaced on the name of it.
Is it madrone? It's either madrone or myrtle, I think.
Myrtle.
It's myrtle.
I did one carving in myrtle and swore I'd never do that again. It's very, very difficult to control because of the interweaving of the grain. And there's lots of other choices. And there's things like this big knot in the black walnut that causes a lot of design changes as you run into those, and they're not always available on the surface.
Thank you. We have about 40 people. Does anybody else have experience with teak that they would like to talk about? That they could share, enlighten us all?
My only experience is it's about $25-30 a board foot. I can't afford it.
Yes.
Yeah. Let me switch gears to Monica. I've never met her husband. He's apparently an actor out of Ashland, but live in Sheridan, so he's part of the Southern Oregon Ashland group. Monica was commissioned in 2019 to do this. These two pieces are the same. They're just two different photographs of Salishan. She was commissioned to do outdoor piece to kind of keep the connectivity and connection alive between the inside that her dad did and what she did. Jim, do you remember if these are Alaska yellow cedar or are they something else? I don't remember.
I don't know. No. But I do have a comment from one of our viewers was mentioning that you have to really stay on top of keeping your tools honed when you're using teak because there's lots of silica in it.
Yeah,
that's true. Also, please notice as we watch these videos, he doesn't have a set of tools. Every one of them's different, and so you just buy the one that looks good for the moment, and it goes on the shelf.
These pictures are the same. The tone is different, but this is the Nordic house on Olson Road, just about a mile or so northeast of Washington Square. In the picture in the center is an explosion of the upper right panel of the door. The photo on the left was courtesy of Monica and her work that she passed on to us, and then the other one was a screen grab. What struck me was the perspective that was designed into the door. These doors are closed, but it looks like they're open. And to me, it creates a very interesting, welcoming kind of a design. She described this project as being designed by her dad, but at a time when he was unable to continue the carving. So she did the work and he did the design, is how she described it. I forget the year that this was done.
This was done about 2005, right before he passed away.
Okay.
And of course, the symbolism on those doors were things taken from symbolism of the different countries representing the Nordic region.
This picture is a big public works project at McMinnville. She gave us a video that was a piece of interview of her talking about this design. The bluish pattern is her weaving. So this is quintessential Monica Setziol Phillips work. The black pieces that you see are chairs. This is sort of a city council chamber that doubles as a courthouse. It's in a big lighted room designed by Bora Architects, and she won the competition to design this. The video describes about 20 different people that gave a design concept. She was one of 3 finalists, and then she was finally selected. And we'll see her carving some of this, but she talks about doing the weaving first to make sure that she knows because it's irregular, she has to know what the size is when she cuts out the channels in the pieces themselves.
And that weaving represents the river in McMinnville.
Okay, thank you, Jim. I don't know where this one is. I was struck by the beauty of the weaving and the color that comes in from not just the natural wood, but it creates, if you will, for me, a really important non-painted kind of way to get some total different dimensions in the works. This is a montage of works. The one on the lower left really is obviously not grid, no fabric. The one to the right of it, this little square, is I think that's the one from the Sitka catalog that was selected to be the piece. So I'm kind of thinking that that's probably the kind of work that people in her workshops would do. I don't know that for sure. And this is a picture of her as a younger woman. You compare that to what we saw in the opening, it's quite different. You just get mesmerized. It's just like walking through an art gallery to see some of these things. These photos were taken on the property across the way from the studio. When Leroy's family was living in Portland, they kind of wanted a weekend escape place. And they bought this property and land, and I don't know if there was any buildings on it, but they eventually built a small place to sleep, and then they built a gallery on the other side of it. So it became kind of a little bit of a twofer. And she told the story of him falling in love with the idea of doing a country garden. So then he planted a bunch of stuff and built some beds right outside the gallery. But he planted so much he needed to water it, so he spent a lot of time having to come out to water the plants to keep them alive. And then eventually he retired, and they ended up living there. They actually are buried on that property. In between the house and the workshop is a small little personal cemetery. Both he and his wife were buried there. So this now switches gears into more practical things that carvers can sort from a technique viewpoint can see.
This is going to be a sphere with decorations. So you start with the weakness of the wood. The best thing to do is to get 2 or 3 chips for one effort. A lot of people first starting out, they're chippies. Too lazy. You go at it with a will. You know, it's not going to hurt you. So the stronger, the faster, the better. You can tell why it's important to have a firm hold. This is another gorgeous tool. A lot of these tools I've had for 50 years. You sharpen them, but you take off an infinitesimal amount. And so they go on forever. Even the thin ones. Difficulty, because one of my sayings is, if it's difficult, it's going to be beautiful. If it's beautiful, it's got to be difficult. Where is my Italia? I have about 200 tools, hand tools. The theory behind it is that you have to have the specific shape for the specific cut. And to improvise is a bad idea because you can't keep it that precise by improvising. So that's one of the reasons I normally have this many tools on a board or more. Mostly sculpture is made with gouges. Gouge is anything that's curved. A chisel is anything that's straight. They used to say that I was the biggest chiseler in town, but it's not true. I'm the biggest gouger. Yeah. All these are first-class steel. This is a number 3 gouge. Just barely a gouge, you see. Just about, probably no more than 1/8 of an inch curve. And I use it all the time for surfacing areas. This is an English tool, which is very good for roughing out. That's the kestrel. You see, the thing about this one, it cuts on the side as well as the front. You get very clean cuts. The tool sometimes, in making big cuts or little cuts, the tool will make marks that are suddenly very nice. And you take it from there. Those are my speeches for today. The thing about what tool you use depends on the wood. With this, I don't need a mallet. But with a hardwood, a very hardwood, I need a mallet. And with a very hard wood, you go chippity chip, like that. You need touch-up stones at your bench. Besides you should have a sharpening area. But sometimes you need to touch up a tool every 10 minutes, depending on what kind of wood you're using. This is this ceramic bench stone, and in order to keep the chisel straight, use the figure 8. The basic technique is to always sharpen toward the tool, never away from the tool. You go away from the tool only to take off a little tiny, sometimes microscopic burr develops. And you use the backstroke to take off the burr. A sharp tool is much more controllable. A dull tool, you have to push and work harder, and you're liable to have more accidents. So you keep them as sharp as possible.
Famous last words. I'm always struck by people's approach to sharpening, and I'm also struck by his. The guy that was in the video is an architect. His name is, he's got a German name. He's got a quite thick accent. I want to say pronounce his last name is Grube, Grube. He was a very important friend of Leroy's, also, I think, a very important patron and sponsor. And I think, did you know him, George? Did you have any contact with that side of him and the architects?
No, that was after I knew him. When I knew him, he was still in Southwest Portland, near the Contemporary Crafts Gallery.
Yeah. Okay. In some of the retrospectives, a lot of it work here is owned in private galleries, private owners, not galleries, private owners, and some of them in the catalogs that I've seen were owned by Joachim Grube. And there's very, very nice rapport in the videos between the two of them. It's about teak.
And Larry,
So what is it?
Larry, it's just fascinating for us to look.
Go ahead, Jim.
It's just fascinating for us to look at this workshop that he's in. This video was done in 2005. It was done months before he passed away. He was in an automobile accident at the age of 89. And when we visited Monica a couple of weeks back, that shop looks just the same as what we're seeing in the video.
I'm going to go back to, we'll replay the video. The one thing I wanted to point out was that when he was carving that one piece that he had laid out across a little stool propped up with a brick, propped up with something. It was kind of straddling between the workbench and his own place.
So what
I've got a question there.
That has made.
Go ahead. Go ahead, Jim.
The question is, did Setziol ever use power chisels? I don't know the answer to that. I doubt it.
I don't know either. There was no evidence of that. There was clear examples of power tools. When we were with Monica, she had a battery-powered router, a Makita battery router that she was using to route out a sizable panel that I did not include in this example because it's a commission that she's working on right now. She also had a serious Dremel, almost looked like an angle grinder, but it was a saw. It looked like maybe a 3-inch blade on it that she used to score some of her work. But I saw no evidence of any in the writing or any in the shop about any power gouges. I don't know that we have any pictures here of a huge installation at one of the Kaiser facilities in Salem. He carved 140 panels that ran around the building. It took him 2 years to carve them. And in the write-up, it said, "I donated my wrist to that project." And you can just imagine what it's like. You can see him here about, the strenuous work dealing with some of these things. this is the story about teak now.
So what is it that has made teak one of your preferred woods?
It's easy to cut. There are no problems. You can do anything with it. I like the color. I like the smell. What else? It's a good indoor and exterior wood. You can use it for exterior doors. The only thing is you have to be careful about where the door is placed, because any wood, but especially teak, will in direct sunlight is going to shrink. That's hard on doors.
Right. Yeah.
I think anybody ought to start on teak and start on hardwood. If you go from hardwood to softwood, it's a lot easier. But if you go from softwood to hardwood, it's more difficult and liable to be frustrating. You have to develop the palm of your hand so that it has a callus in there. A callus so that you don't get blisters. And other thing is to develop your own eyeballs instead of using the measure all the time. I often do something by eyeball and then measure it. You see how good I am. And very often it's right on the money after all these years. This is going to be 2 pyramids. No technique involved. The only technique is to flood it so that it soaks in as much as possible. There are people who say that oil changes the color, but actually it restores the color. A lot of people think the lumber you buy is the way the tree grows, but it isn't. It grows darker than you buy it. When it's growing, it's this color. When it's dried out, it's this color. Watco is a penetrator sealer. I think it originated in Denmark. But I like Watco because it's a very good sealer.
We can have a separate discussion about Watco. I don't have any personal experience or preferences or biases. I was struck when we visited Monica. We asked her about how she treated her wood, and she whipped out Watco. She's using, as far as I can tell, exactly the same thing her dad used. So, part of the discussion, I think, on the 23rd will be a piece of that kind of a conversation about, what would we say we would, pick up, but we would copy or not copy, kind of a thing.
Larry, as I recall, Monica used Watco on indoor commissions, and she used something else. I can't recall what it was for outdoors. And I remember when we were discussing that, I mentioned that I used Epiphanes, which is a European-made super UV resistant varnish, but that's not what she used.
Yeah. So we had the one shot with her, and we were very sensitive, all three of us, about being too close, too long, in masked. She was rushed with the commission, and so we had to cram as much of this as we possibly could into what turned out to be, I think, no more than 2 hours. There's a comment that she made that was quite interesting. She said that her dad was very highly influenced by a Japanese carver in the last 10 years of his life. And she rattled off the guy's name, and it was Enku, E-N-K-U. And she walked over and pulled out the book from the library. That was that book. And he was an itinerant Buddhist carver, from what I could tell, probably carved with a hand axe and primitive knives between 1630 and 1680, and he did a massive number of primitive kind of figurines, I would call them. And the book is available, by the way, and I got it from the interlibrary loan. But it has this kind of, in this picture we're looking at, the very definitive gouge marks of that central circular piece, and even a lot of the other ones are there. They're just not highly finished. And the book made the comment that so much of what we experience as Westerners from Japanese art is aristocratic art. It's what the temples saw and what the emperors saw and what the rich people saw, highly polished, highly finished kind of things. But the folk art that the people in the countryside had to deal with was way different. And I think he was trying to grapple with that. I didn't get a sense that he picked up any of that while he was in Japan as a soldier, because I was quite young, and I don't even think he was probably focused on that anymore. So, Jim, this is your photograph, or did I get this off the web? I can't remember. This is Middleman Jewish Community Center. So for those of us,
yeah, I'm sorry. It's Middleman Jewish Community Center is right near Multnomah Village, about a mile away, and I think it's the Garden Home neighborhood, but I'm not sure. And when I learned from one of our members about this piece there, I ironically had been to concerts at this center, and I noticed it, but that was before I knew the name of Setziol. And this is a very large panel, and I tried to go there a few weeks back to see it. I could not get in, COVID restrictions. But I happen to know a violinist in the Jewish Community Orchestra, and we learned who the director of the center was, and he was kind enough to send me this picture.
Go back to please.
Well, I do have two comments or questions here.
So, Tom Willing about the marine finish.
Oh, okay. So Tom Willing mentioned to everybody that Daly's Seafin, SEAFIN, is a great marine grade finish for outdoors.
Oh, that's great. Thank you, Tom.
And I would add epiphanes to that too. And then from Christopher Holmes, if anyone has $40,000, one of his doors is up on eBay right now. And he provides a link.
In the chat.
so I guess contact Larry there if you want that link, or it'll be on the chat. Okay.
There we go. I wonder if they take PayPal. When you do 1,000 pieces of work, these things are going to be a lot of different places. We're lucky that we got the Nordic doors a couple miles away, and we got this piece a couple miles away, and really in our backyard for those of us centered in and around the Multnomah Village area. Some of this gets circulated. The promotion for this program got circulated to the Central Oregon group, and one of them said, by the way, there's a Setziol piece at the St. Charles Hospital, and that was listed in the handout. So anybody here from Central Oregon, you probably know that. But you're probably stuck not being able to just wander in and take a look at it. But, in the next 5 years, as we travel around, we're relatively mobile. We should be able to see more of this stuff. Jim dug this. This is from Skamania Lodge. I've been to Skamania a number of times. I thought a lot of the wood carvings were maybe done by him, maybe not, but not many were done by him. But this one was. It was commissioned by the lodge, and it's actually a piece from a weaving from Monica and this particular carving that was done for them. The Skamania is an hour up the Columbia River, east of Portland, and is a marvelous facility designed by the same architect, certainly the same developer as that developed Salishan and developed Sun River. So, a major developer.
If you go to Skamania, you can check in with the front desk or the concierge, and they have a list of all the art that's in various places in the lodge. And I think, as I recall, they had one piece by Monica and two by Leroy.
Yeah. I don't know where this photograph came from. I was struck by it in the sense that it looked like simple siding, probably on the side of some building, and how, from an architectural viewpoint, you can make art out of nothing, if you will.
Yep.
It is caught.
What that is, it's a gate or part of a fence on the Setziol property. It's from the retrospective, as I recall, and it's actually, you have it sideways. It's supposed to be the sphere is supposed to be up on top, and that purplish is a real flower. I think a clematis, but I'm not sure.
Okay.
Oh, and one other comment here from Tom Willing. He says he believes there's a piece of his in the Calvin Presbyterian Church in Tiger too. I don't know if we have that one on our list, but I know that the Lutheran Church downtown has quite a bit of his art in there, and so maybe that's one we need to add to it.
Yeah. Well, Jim may want to pursue this, or somebody else may as well. We are not art curators. Keeping track of this is quite amazing. When the University of Oregon Museum of Art did the retrospective in 1991, in the introduction, they highlighted the fact that the Oregon Arts Commission commissioned a study to inventory his work in 1987. And they inventoried 715 pieces that he had done by 1987. And they identified where 400 of those pieces were, which means they ran out of gas or money or time or whatever. But that particular foundational study formed the basis for how the exhibition works, and they were able to pull some out of private exhibitions. I wrote to the Oregon Art Commission asking them if they could help me locate that study to see, and it would be interesting to find out. I don't know if I'll ever get an answer, but I thought I would try. George, you have a comment? No? Okay.
Well, yeah, notice as we're going through these, he has very few concave, like bowl shapes, and most of it's chip carving, so you're carving into the saw cuts, and convex, rounded forms.
Yeah. Interesting. I picked these up. Obviously, we've seen these photos on the right in the lobby of Salishan Lodge, but really two different perspectives of quite a large piece of work. Jim and I and Jerry Sellers had brainstormed the idea of putting together a couple of session play shop, a chance to take some piece of wood and try out something that you want to do for your house or your garden or your wall. And if there's interest, we'll try to pursue that. This is not a class or a shop, but these kind of sculptural things are just way beyond a lot of the stuff that our carving clubs are dealing with. It's obviously a huge amount of wood. And just kind of handling the mass of that becomes an interesting issue. I'm going to switch gears. These next two are on Monaco, and they came from the McMinnville project that she did.
Bringing images and concepts to life in wood is not easy. Monica talks about some of the challenges and techniques of sculpting in wood.
You laminate a little bigger than the size that you want, and then you trim it. Because when you laminate, your ends it's not going to be perfect on the ends. And then what I do next, I've learned to be patient, is to do the edges all around first and get that out of the way. Because once you've made a cut, it's a little harder to surface that. Then I sketch what's going to happen. And then I use the circular saw. And next step is to rough out where the weaving's going to go. Make sure that's all okay. I rough it out with a circular saw. You have to just, it's very tedious. You make many, many small cuts, and then you actually hit them with a mallet. This will be used for outlining that. So, and it actually works better if you do it that way. See that? So you do that all the way around and take it down a little ways. The thing is, when you surface, you have to find what's the right direction to surface from. And sometimes you're pushing forward and you're going that way, and sometimes you're going this way and pulling back, depending on what the wood wants to do. So that's where I see this as a collaboration with the wood, because you have a certain amount of say, but the wood has a certain amount of say, and you can only impose your will to a certain extent, and then you have to listen to what the wood tells you it's willing to do. Surfacing is fun to do. Some boards are more dense and harder to carve. The other thing about carving a softer wood, soft wood is not very forgiving. And so you have to make sure your tools are sharp and that there aren't any nicks or anything, because it'll show up immediately in the cut. You know, all of this I owe a deep debt of gratitude to my dad, because that's how I've basically learned the old technique of watching him do it. So these are the sharpening stones. You put a slight amount of pressure on your tool as you go forward, and you roll it slightly because the tool has a slight bevel, and then you just slide it back. So the pressure is the down forward and then back, down forward and then back, and you do that until you feel that you've raised a little burr, and then I use this, and then you just run it over the stone, and then you have to feel it. So you have to develop sensitivity in your fingers, so then you can feel whether the burr's gone and whether the tool's sharp. Being able to sharpen a tool well just takes time. You know, most people say you must have a lot of chisels, and there's a popular misunderstanding. Wood carvers are mostly not chiselers. Mostly you have gouges. And gouges can be anything from a U to a V to a very flat gouge that's barely got a bevel to it, but it has a slight bevel. This fan shape is also very, very useful. I love that tool. That's a very, very useful tool. And good tools are, of course, expensive. So you can't chintz on your equipment. That just doesn't work out. One of the discoveries I made doing the very first panel for this, because I haven't done so many Alaska yellow cedar panels, was that importance of making vertical cuts or cross grain cuts before doing with grain cuts. And so that was an important lesson. So there's always something that you can learn every time you're dealing with wood.
I don't know if you noticed, she did a lot of hogging out with the saw. I mean, she does a massive amount of cuts in order to make it easy to just waste all the stuff.
Guys, it's not a
So we have to talk.
I have a comment.
Go ahead.
That also establishes your depth uniformly.
Yeah.
All cuts, if you're doing it with gouges, it's hard to get a uniform background.
It's really good.
So I have a question for Tom. I've been getting that uniform depth using a router, or George. I'm sorry. So what is your preference, saw or router?
Oh, I don't think it makes a difference. It's what you have and what you're comfortable with.
Okay.
And how big the background is. The router gets to be a challenge when it's a narrow spot to get through, and the saw gets there easier. But for big areas, the router makes it nice and flat.
Yep. Thank you.
Masa Natani was on earlier. I'm not sure he still is, but if he is, I'll tribute to him. He's a carving instructor for us from northern Japan. Been around since in Portland since the mid '80s. He taught bowl carving for us for a while till we had to lock down, and he had us drill down into the center of the bowl, except a little bit, to do the same thing, George, just to establish the depth so you knew where you were shooting for. And that worked out. Just from a bowl shape, that turned out to be to work out. There's a lot of symbolism in this next piece, and Monica's going to talk about that.
It's not a representational kind of piece, but the symbols are there. And those were taken directly from comments that City Council and the mayor made.
The symbols are all related to either community or to the law, government, those kinds of things. This is, of course, representative of the wine country and the wine culture, this city of McMinnville. And then this, I was looking for symbols of knowledge, and I discovered that the hazelnut is a symbol for knowledge. This is the rune for house, and this is the Oriental symbol for the wheel of justice. This is another rune, and this is the rune for mankind. And then this is the symbol, the sunflowers become the symbol of the ecology movement. And the last one is the Tao, which is from the Tao Te Ching and is a symbol for peace.
What struck me about this was how highly symbolic that particular commission was, but it was necessary because that's what she was dealing with. The Arts Commission, whoever organized that, had done a massive process inside the city with the mayor and the council people and the others on the Art Commission to figure out what they wanted that piece of work to do. This is now switching gears back to Leroy. There's two more videos, I think. They're a couple minutes each. These are the early years and his history, which I think have some important messages, particularly this one about how foundational the arts education was for him.
So we have to talk about Leroy Setziol.
Oh. I can think of better things.
Where did he come from? Way back from the East Coast. The younger years.
The younger years were mostly a disaster. I was raised in Buffalo, and in East Buffalo, which was a poor neighborhood, a working class community, surrounded on four sides by railroads. So I was raised in a railroad immigrant community. The people there were all German, mostly German and Italian, but also some Russian and Irish. And for some reason or other, we all got along. I never thought of it before, but I think that probably means that I was raised in a European atmosphere. And some people have said that I'm a European, but I don't know about that. I think that may be a little bit true, but I think that if it is true, it's because of that neighborhood. I had the advantage of New York State public school education, and one of the things that they had that they still don't have out here is we had in our public elementary school we had a full-time music teacher, a full-time art teacher, a full-time gym teacher, and so on, all full-time and for kids on a high level. I remember Miss Tewksbury was our art teacher, and she was very good teacher, very good. And that's when I began to fall in love with the arts. Because of the Depression, especially in college, we had a superior education because the professors couldn't get a job either, and so they had to take what was available. A couple of them had an interest in European arts on a small level, but nevertheless it was there. And I remember being attracted to German carving, Italian painting, and sculpture.
You came to Oregon?
To Oregon, yes. We came to Oregon in 50.
In 50.
50, yeah. And I came to Oregon because my wife, Ruth, got a job here with the Chinese Presbyterian Church in a nursery. And that was the beginning of my career. In that Ruth is the one who brought home the money. Not much, but the much. Ruth made $2,400 a year, and I made nothing. My first year as a full-time artist, I sold $15. The next year, I sold $75 for the whole year, and the inspector came out and said he told me I was lying, and but I wasn't. But I, for some reason or other, I suppose because any alternative seemed to me to be a disaster, that I stayed with it anyway. And of course, if it weren't for Ruth, I would not have been able to, because by that time we had 2 children.
Right.
So that is, there's another minute of closing. It's kind of mesmerizing. We'll just let you check out or hang around. We finally pull the plug on this one. The piece that was at the very end, that kind of dark purplish kind of a color, was in his house, and it was Abraham sacrificing Isaac, and he did that early. Monica made the comment that to survive in the early days as a carver, he sold Madonnas to the Catholic bookstores somewhere and religious art, and that was sort of the necessary piece of that. It's between 1950 and 1965, as I said earlier, 15 years. That's a long time to try to survive. Monica was born, I think, in 41. So by the time they moved here, she was already 9 years old. So you kind of think about that. George, you said you met him when he was living in the Corbett area. Monica said they were living on 82nd and Foster for a while. They had really pretty meager surroundings. He had a storefront where he carved and lived in the back. So I don't know what Portland was like in that time. But I was also struck by the sort of if you will, the European influence, the Depression era influence to give us a carver that produced this body of work. Max Sutter, who I mentioned before, had been taught for 40 years, was in that same era kind of thing. He started teaching carving in 1935. And so by the time 1970 rolls around, he had already been working for all those decades. It's quite a long time. Nora Hall was a teenager during the occupation in Germany and the Netherlands. Her dad was a master carver. And so when she immigrated also, guess what, 1950, had a couple kids, moved to initially Phoenix, ended up in Long Beach, and then raised a family. And then eventually ended up doing carving and commissions for a variety of kinds, but basically a European carving person. I listed on that notable carvers a guy named Leo Lambo, who was an intriguing, interesting character to me, because his son, Leo died in the late 90s. His son showed up at one of our Guild of Oregon Woodworkers meetings and said he wanted to sell his dad's carving tool set. Was anybody interested? And the guild ended up funding that. We own that set of 50 tools, and it's available to us for carving classes. But Leo was born in Romania, raised in Poland, captured by the Germans in World War II, prisoner of war, got out, lived in France for a while, learned carving in France, and moved to Portland. And you can guess when, right? 1950-ish. So, the post-war kind of migration of people, if you will, I think a very quite powerful immigrant story is, played itself out to our benefit in our own backyard. Anybody have any comments or questions?
Well, there are
Nope. Nothing new.
okay. No new questions on the chat.
Well, I'm full of stories tonight. I live near Leo. I've spent many wonderful days with him, learning sharpening and carving. And
Did you meet him by accident, George? What
yeah,
was
we
his case?
neighbors. He had a little shop front, and I stopped by to see what he was doing and struck up a friendship and learned all kinds of stuff.
And you were just a kid then?
College.
College.
Yeah.
So you said Portland State?
Yeah.
Yeah. Interesting.
And I got off into other things and developed a different skill, and I got into metalwork. So I've done bronze casting and forging and welding and all that kind of stuff.
Nice. Okay. Well, I look forward to having more conversations with you. And if you care to join us on the 23rd, I'd welcome that.
I'd like to get information on how to submit some photos.
So give me a call at 503.
Okay.
503-312-7745. Or email me at lpwade@gmail.com. You can take a look at the Oregon Carvers Guild website. You can look at galleries, and we're trying to populate those. We have lots of work to do to get those. We're trying to create some general galleries, but we're also trying to each member can create their own private gallery. And those private galleries can then be pooled at the end so anybody can look at them. So depending on what your objective is, we can try to accommodate that in all ways. Masa Natani, who I mentioned, has a huge library of his photos, many of them professionally done, and they're just stunning work. And it's just so much to see. If you have any feedback, send me an email, lpwade@gmail.com. If you have ways that we can improve this program or this type of program, let me know. This is a work in process, folks. We are trying to figure out how to do this. There's pros and cons of doing stuff online. It's not as personal. I can't see everybody. I can see 5 people at a time because of the way I've got this thing set up. So I think we're making progress every time, but we got a ways to go. Anyway, thanks for your support. Thanks for hanging in. Jim, you have a comment?
Yes, Larry. I'd just like to thank you for being our fearless leader, number one. But I wanted to say what was really important about Leroy Setziol to me. Most of the carving classes I have taken from Mary May and Chuck Reinhardt and others have been focused on the fundamentals, and they've been carving flowers and other things. But everybody in the class is doing the same thing. And I'm just of the nature where I don't like to go with the flow. I like to be original. And so Leroy Setziol and Masa and his work on bowls and the freedom that we had to make our own designs allowed me to do my own thing. And so that's, and I've already made 3 sculptures, 2 of them kind of large and 1 smaller, that are inspired by Masa. And this is just, I'm inspired by Leroy. And this is just knowing his name in the last year and a half. So I'm looking forward to doing more work. And frankly, for my courses, I'm not interested in doing courses where everybody in the class is doing the same thing, even though that's what I'm doing right now to test the Sutter course. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you.
Oh, we do have another question.
There's several all of a sudden.
All of a sudden, we have several questions, Larry. Do you have time to address them?
Of course, I do.
Okay. So the first one is from Tom Willing to everyone. He makes a comment, a directory or guide to different species characteristics might be interesting. And as I recall, one of our books has a nice, very simple guide to carving woods. Do you want to describe that, Larry?
Well, I will. There's two comments. I noticed another question is, did we record the meetings? And my answer is I forgot. So it's hosed on that one. We did a survey last July about topics that people wanted to cover, and number one on the list was different woods for carving. And Jerry Boone has been beating his head to try to find speakers or a speaker that we can deal with to kind of cover what turned out to be an incredibly wide and deep subject. And there's lots of appendices and comments in various books about different kinds of woods. And a lot of it depends on what you are trying to carve. So the answer is we don't have that directory yet. It's clear that the things that unite us as carvers, I'm going to switch gears to kind of a philosophical thing. There are so many different kinds of carvings and carvers around that it's hard to get critical mass with everybody, but what unites us is some form of tools, sources of steel, how to deal with steels, how to sharpen them, how to store them, sort of all things related to tools. There's another theme about wood, and I'll just in general call that materials, but obviously wood is a 99% of what we're dealing with, but there are some non-wood carving things, and I'll use woodblock printing is done with a Japanese plywood called Shina. There's grainless high-density urethane for making signs. There's linoleum. There's soap. There's clay for doing modeling and sculpturing and architecture. So besides wood, there are other kind of materials that represent a piece of that. But if anybody can contribute the names of speakers that would help us deal with varieties of carving woods, all the way from what we've talked about tonight to Jelyatong and Tupelo, and if you will, non-basswood, non-butternut kind of alternatives that people might encounter with carving. So,
and we have another comment here from Julie Niemeyer to everyone. Thank you to both of you for putting this together. I feel like I just went to a college lecture. Very nice. Yeah. And then somebody said, Diane M., I joined the meeting late. Did you happen to record the meeting? And I think you said you did not.
I forgot. I had it right on the top of my list, and my eyes glazed over as I was trying to deal with all the announcements. So that's true. So there's also a comment I noticed about Rose Holdorf. Rose lives in Corvallis. She was scheduled in November to December to teach 2 spoon carving classes for us, and we had them underway. We were a week away before we had to shut down. And she does teach also, as noted here, at the Nordic Center. At least she was scheduled. I doubt that that's going on because of the lockdown. I can't imagine anybody doing it. She also teaches at Wildcraft Studio in inner southeast Portland, which is quite an interesting, I would call it everyman arts organization with lots of different kinds of things that are quite interesting. Okay, I'm going to turn the video on. You can watch. This is a little mesmerizing 1 minute, 17 second of Leroy carving his initials into end grain of something that looks like Alaska yellow to me. And then I'll hang around if everybody wants to chat. I'm not going anywhere. I love conversations, but I'll play this and then I'll stop sharing the screen.